Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I'm going to be talking about the Big Brother edit via confessionals. I've done a few videos about this a few years ago where I ranked the jurors who had the highest and lowest confessional amounts, the pre-jurors with the highest low and lowest amount of confessional counts, and the same thing with the endgamers. But I'm not going to format this video like that. So my goal is to go over all of the Big Brother USA seasons and calculate whether the season overall, as well as the contestants in each season, is over edited, under edited, or perfectly edited. So, how I'm going to do this is very confusing, and I'm going to kind of cite another YouTuber who did this with Survivor Australia seasons. I'll put their information here, and you can listen to it there if I'm not going to explain it properly in my description of how I came up with this in a few seconds. So my process is I'm going to count or look up the overall amount of confessionals in a season, and then, so that will be the overall confessionals, and then I'm going to look up the episode sum. So this pretty much means if someone lasted 5 episodes on the season and they're the first boot, they'll have a sum of 5. The second boot would have lasted 8 episodes, and the third boot would have lasted 11 episodes. So I do 5 plus 8 plus 11 up until the first place person who lasted for, let's just say, the season's 30 episodes. I'll add plus 30 for the winner, and overall, once I add the amount of episodes each contestant was in during that season, and you come up with a number, that will be the episode sum. So, how to determine whether a season will be evenly edited, or if a season was evenly edited, each contestant would have a certain amount of a certain amount of confessionals by episode. And this is the rate by episode sum. So how I'm going to determine this is by dividing the overall confessionals in a season by the episode sum to come up with the rate by episode sum, which would be the average that every contestant needs in every episode for an even edit. So the overall confessionals, episode sum, and the rate by episode sum are the three main components of this. And that's just for this first part. The second part is going to be where I look at each contestant for that season. So, for an example, Justin from Big Brother 2, he has an overall amount of 12 confessionals or diary rooms. So, the overall will be the amount of diary rooms that a contestant actually has on the season. And then the next variable that I'm going to use is the expected count by episode amount. So this pretty much is just the rate by episode sum multiplied by the amount of episodes that the contestant was in. So Justin was in 4 episodes, so I'll use the rate by episode sum times 4. That will show a number. And that number would be the amount of confessionals that they should have had the edit been even. So the next part of this is we're going to compare the overall, meaning the amount of diary rooms they actually got, and the expected diary room count that they should have had based on the episodes that they were in the season. And we are going to pretty much subtract the expected count by episode amount from the overall diary room or confessional count, and this would come up with the final variable within this, which is the misallocation by episode. So that pretty much shows the differences between the amount of confessionals they got versus the amount that they should have gotten. And if this number is a positive, that means that they got more confessionals than they should have. If it's a negative, that means they got less confessionals or diary rooms that they should have. And by the end of this, we are going to add up all of the misallocations of each of the house guests into a number, which is the season total misallocation amount. and we'll have a number there. And then the final components that we're going to use is the percentage of confessionals misallocated. So we're going to divide the total misallocation amount for the season by the amount of diary rooms. And we will have the percentage of confessionals misallocated. So that's the whole process. And if it's too confusing, look up the link that I will reference for a better explanation of this. Of course, the first season in contention is Big Brother 2. So the overall confessionals in this season is 1,628, and the episode sum, meaning adding the amount of episodes that each of the house guests were in, is 213. So the rates by episode sum that I found, which I used the two numbers, is 7.64. I could go on with the other numbers, but it's just way too long. But overall, this means that the rates by episode sum is 8 confessionals or diary room sessions per episode. And this is what everyone in the cast should get throughout all the episodes for there to be a quote unquote balanced edit. So the first person on the list is Justin, who overall has 12 confessionals, and the expected count by episode amount, which he should have had during his 4 episodes, is 30.5 onwards. Due to his overall being a lot lower than his expected count by episode amount, he has a misallocation by episode of negative 18.57. Cheryl overall has a confessional count of 18, and her expected count by episode amount is 30.57, since she and Justin were both in 4 episodes. Her misallocation by episode amount is a negative 12.57, so she's not as under edited as Justin, but still under edited. Autumn overall has the diary room confessional count of 35, and the expected count by episode amount for her for lasting 8 episodes is 53.5. Due to this, she has a negative 18.5 misallocation by episode, so she is also someone that is very under edited. Shannon overall has 66 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 76 confessional diary rooms. So her misallocation by episode is negative 10.43. So that is unedited, or a bit unedited, but still decent enough. So pretty much if you have a misallocation amount from negative 10 to 10, you have a decent enough edit. Anything above 10 is a large edit, and anything below negative 10 is a low edit. So Mike has an overall confessional amount of 100, and the expected count by episode amount for him is 99.36. This causes for a misallocation by episode of 0.63. So honestly, he has a pretty even edit akin to the amount of confessionals and the amount of episodes he lasted. So this is a perfect ratio, which really isn't common, and you'll see that as we go through all of the seasons. Kent has an overall diary room amount of 95, and his expected count by the amount of episodes he lasted in is 122. This causes for a misallocation of negative 27.29. So he definitely has a hugely under-edited confessional count. Krista has an overall confessional amount of 107, and her expected count by episode amount is 145. This causes for a negative 38.22 misallocation for her. Bunky has an overall diary room amount of 195, so almost double the last 3 people. And the expected count by episode amount based on the amount of episodes he lasted in is 183.43, causing for an 11.56 misallocation. So he has a bit more confessionals than he would have on a balanced edit, but he's on the borderline between fair and bloated. Hardy has an overall diary room count of 219, and the expected count by episode amount pertaining the amount he lasted in is 206.36. This means that he has a misallocation amount of 12.63 confessionals. So he's a bit over the average or perfect amount. So he's a bit over edited pertaining his confessionals, but it's not a big deal. Monica overall has 164 diary rooms, and the expected count by episode amount for her is 221.65. This means that she has a negative 57.65 misallocation. This is easily the hugest misallocation on a negative way, or on the negative lens, meaning that she is severely under edited, and no one else has as big of a rate as she did. Nicole has an overall confessional count of 292, and her expected count by the amount of episodes she lasted in is 229.29 rooms. This means that her misallocation is 62.70. So this is a huge misallocation in the positive lens, meaning that she is severely over edited based on her confessional count. Will overall has a 325 diary room count, and the expected count by episode amount for him is 229. This means that his misallocation by episode is 95.7 confessionals, meaning that he has almost 100 confessionals more than he would have had the season and the diary rooms been distributed evenly. So the season total misallocation, which I created by adding up all the misallocations from the house guests together, so the number for this is 31.14, meaning that there are 31 more diary rooms than there should be due to the unbalanced edit. As we go through the seasons, some will have larger numbers, some will have shorter numbers, so it'll be interesting to see what will come to be, and some will have bigger numbers in the positive or the negative as well. So some could have less confessionals than they should. So that'll be interesting to delve into. Honestly, their numbers weren't too huge for most of the house guests, but the large discrepancies came with the final three, where I think if they gave some of Will and Nicole's confessionals to Monica especially, the total misallocation number would be smaller for sure. Though in general, many of the earlier boots needed more confessionals, and Will and Nicole could have been distributed more towards them, if we're going by the arguments of the balanced edit. Now we're moving on to Big Brother 3, and the season has an overall confessional amount of 2,310, and the episode sum, which I used to add up the amount of episodes each house guest was in, is 259. So the rates by episode sum was used or created by dividing those two numbers, and I got 8.91 confessionals, which rounds up to 9 confessionals. So the average amount of confessionals that everyone would get in every episode for this to have a balanced confessional edit amount is 9. Lori has an overall diary room count of 41, and the expected diary room count pertaining to the amount of episodes she lasted is 44.59. This means that her misallocation by episode is negative 3.59. So overall, she has 4 confessionals less than she should have if this was a balanced edit. But her misallocation is very small, so in general, I feel like she got the amount that she should have gotten, give or take. Tanya overall has a diary room count of 32, and her expected count by episode amount, based off of the prior data, is 71.35. This means that she has a misallocation by episode of negative 39.35. This means that she has less than half of the amount of diary rooms that she should have gotten if this was a balanced edit. Eric overall has a diary room count of 90, and his expected count by episode amount is 124, meaning that he has a negative 34.86 misallocation by episode. So he generally needed about 30 more diary rooms. Josh has an overall diary room count of 166, and his expected count by episode amount is 151.62. This means that he has 14 more diary rooms than he should have gotten if this was a balanced edit, but he only barely bumped up to the over edited compared to some of the others by 4. So Kiara has an overall diary room count of 148, and her expected count by episode amount due to the average that would equate to a balanced edit is 178.37, meaning that her misallocation is negative 30.37, meaning that she has 30 diary rooms less than she should have if this was evenly distributed. Jerry has an overall diary room count of 146, and his expected count by episode amount is 205, meaning that his misallocation by episode is negative 59. So this is the largest number so far, even beating Monica's negative misallocation amount, so he's severely under edited. Roddy has a diary room count of 190, and his expected count by episode amount is 231.89, meaning that he has a misallocation amount by negative 41. And I'm honestly very shocked by this. I thought he would have had a lot more diary rooms in the season, especially pertaining to his role on the season. But I guess they just didn't find him that interesting, or there are just many others that stood out a lot more. Speaking of that, Marcellus has an overall diary room amount of 298, meaning that he has over 100 more diary rooms than Roddy, despite only lasting an episode longer than him. And due to this, Marcellus's expected count by episode amount is 240. His misallocation by episode is 57.18, meaning that he has 57 diary rooms more than he should have if this was going to be evenly distributed, meaning that he is very over edited. Amy has an overall diary room count of 227, and the expected count by episode amount based on the amounts that she was in is 214. This means that her misallocation is 12, which is a pretty good number and it's just a bit over the average balanced amount. Though in general, I still think she got a very balanced edit. Despite that, Jason has an overall diary room count of 286, and the expected count for him by episode amount is 276.48, meaning his misallocation by episode is 9.51. So he is in that perfect middle point where he has a very balanced confessional count and edit based off of this. Danielle has an overall diary room count of 387, which is over 100 more than Jason, and her expected diary room count by episode amount is 285. This means that her misallocation by episode is 101.59, meaning she has over 100 diary rooms than she should have if this was going to be evenly distributed. Danielle's a star, but oh my goodness, I believe this number is higher than Wells from Big Brother 2, and this will probably be one of the highest over edits in Big Brother history. Lisa has an overall diary room count of 299, and the expected count for her by episode amount is 285, meaning that her misallocation by episode is only 13.59. So she is a bit over that balanced median, but overall she has a good balanced distribution count. So this is interesting. I added up all the misallocations via house guess, and I got this number, which is 0.000000. I believe it's like 8 decimals of zeros before we get 49. Pretty much meaning that the misallocation is perfect. And because of this, I couldn't really divide it into anything since the number is way too small. So despite Danielle and Marcellus having more diary rooms and a lot of the earlier boots having less diary rooms, it isn't to the point where it's overall unbalanced regarding the distribution, where in seasons that we'll see in the future, the season misallocation is a lot larger. So some people are over edited to the point of ridiculousness, some are under edited, and honestly, this just shows that no one in Big Brother 3 got a ghost edit, where there are some in future seasons that definitely fit that criteria. Next is Big Brother 4, which has an overall confessional amount of 2,218, and the episode sum of the season is 254, where I added all the episodes that each contestant was in, causing for that number. The rate by episode sum, which I created by dividing the prior two numbers, it's 8.73, and we round that up to 9, meaning that the average confessional per episode and per contestant would be 9 confessionals in order to make this an evenly distributed edit pertaining to the confessionals. Scott has an overall confessional amount of 36, and the expected count for him by episode amount is 34.9. So pretty much about 35, meaning his misallocation by episode amount is 1.07, meaning that he has one more confessional than he would have had this been evenly distributed. But his ratio is so small that he pretty much got the amount of confessionals that he should have gotten. Amanda has an overall confessional count of 31, and for her expected count by episode, which is 43.66, this means that she has a misallocation of negative 12.66, meaning that she has 12 less confessionals than she should if this were evenly distributed, which is still a fine enough number, just a bit under that balanced median by 2. Michelle has an overall confessional amount of 38, and the expected count by episode for her is 69.85. This means her misallocation by episode is negative 31.85, meaning that she has 31 less confessionals than she should have, which means she's very under-edited. David has an overall diary room count of 61. Yes, I'm using confessional and diary room interchangeably, but you all know what I mean. Anyways, his expected count by episode amount is 96. And that means that his misallocation by episode is negative 35, making him very under-edited, which is weird because he has such a huge personality, but I guess they couldn't transfer that over into interesting diary rooms. Dana has an overall confessional diary room count of 152, and her episode amount, or expected count by episode amount, is 122.25, whatever, meaning that her misallocation by episode amount is 29.74, meaning she has that amount more confessionals than she would have had this been more balanced, which is a decent amount, which is over edited but not overbearingly over edited. Nathan has an overall diary room count of 121, and his expected count by episode amount is 148, meaning that he has 27 less confessionals than he should have based on the misallocation. Justin has 141 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 174.64, meaning that his misallocation is 33 less than he should based on if this were balanced. Jack has an overall diary room count of 154, and his expected count by episode amount is 200, meaning that his misallocation by episode is negative 46.84. And he is borderline purpled. I'm not even going to lie with these numbers. Anyways, G has an overall diary room count of 225, and his expected count by episode amount is 227, meaning that he has 2 less diary rooms than he should have. But in general, this is a very balanced confessional count, all things withstanding. Erica's overall confessional diary room count is 266, and her expected count based on the amount of episodes she was in is 253, meaning that her misallocation is 13, meaning she has 13 more diary rooms than she should have if this was balanced, which is a good enough ratio, which is just above that perfect median range. Robert has an overall diary room count of 287, and his expected count by episode amount is 270, meaning that his misallocation by episode is 17 more than the average for him, which is solid enough, but not over edited. Allison's overall diary room count is 362, and her expected count by episode amount is 288, meaning that her misallocation by episode is 74.16, meaning that she has one of the largest misallocations in a positive way, in a positive way, meaning that she has one of the biggest over edits so far. June's overall diary room count is at 344, and her expected count by episode amount is 288.16 as well. But her misallocation by episode is 56.16, which is still a very large over imbalance, but nowhere near as large as Allison or even compared to Will or Danielle. So, yeah. Okay, so the season total misallocation for Big Brother 4, based off of me adding all the misallocations via house guest, is 2.53, meaning that the misallocation is only by 2. And obviously, you see the percentage of confessionals being very low, meaning that despite Allison and June having a bit too much, Dana as well, and some of the earlier boots not having as much, the imbalance is in general very small. And we will see that once we look into other seasons. So with Big Brother 5, there are 1,700 overall confessionals with an episode sum of 288, which I figured out by adding up all the episodes that each house guest was in during the season. So I divided those two numbers to come up with the rate by episode sum, which is 5.9, rounding up to 6 confessionals. So if the season and confessionals were evenly edited and distributed, each house guest would get 6 confessionals in each episode. Okay, so with Mike, he has an overall confessional diary room count of 23, and his expected count by episode amount is 23.6. So his misallocation by episode is zero point 0.6, so less than one confessional, meaning that he has a balanced confessional edit, right? Balanced regarding his distribution. Lori has an overall diary room count of 36, and her expected count by the amount of episodes she lasted is 41.31. This causes her for a misallocation of -5, which is still a pretty balanced distribution pertaining her confessional count. Holly has an overall diary room count of 49, and her expected count by episode amount is 59, meaning that her misallocation is by -10. So she literally just tipped over into being a bit under edited when it comes to a confessional count. But it's really by only 0.2 decimal points. So literally, she still has a pretty solid enough distribution when it comes to her confessionals and her edit. Scott has an overall diary room count of 85, and his expected count by episode amount is 76.73, meaning that his misallocation by episode amount is 9.7, meaning he was borderline on being over edited, but he's still in that nice balancing act. So with Jace, he has an overall confessional count of 155, and his expected count by episode amount is 94.4. This means that his misallocation by episode is by 61.44, meaning that he has 61 more diary rooms than he should have had if this was a balanced edit. But it's clear that they wanted Jace to be the star of the show, and that's why his diary room count distribution is so large in comparison to everyone else. But all the other pre-jurors have solid distribution. Okay, so Will has an overall diary room count of 136, and his expected count by episode amount is 112, causing him to have a misallocation of over 24, pertaining the amount of confessionals that he got that were over the amount. Natalie has an overall diary room count of 57, and her expected count by the amount of episodes she lasted in is 129, causing her misallocation to be negative 72, which is obviously huge. So a large part of this is definitely due to the twin twist, causing her to not even be in the house for the first 4 to 5 weeks of the season, and obviously that's going to affect her screen time and presence in the house. Adria has an overall diary room count of 118, and her expected count by episode amount is 141, causing her misallocation by episode to be negative 23. So I do think she also suffered from the twin twist when it came to the distribution of confessionals and airtime, but she wasn't nearly as affected as her sister was. Marvin has an overall diary room count of 195, and his expected count by episode amount is 147, meaning that his misallocation by episode is 48.56, meaning that he got more diary rooms than he should have if we were going by the balanced edit. But he's funny as heck, so I can't blame them. Karen's overall diary room count is 108, and her expected count by episode amount is 159, causing her to have a negative 51.37 misallocation, meaning that she was severely under-edited. And this one's weird because she's very funny and she's very witty, but they just didn't think she was worth getting much screen time, which I never really got. Nokomis has an overall diary room count of 148, and her expected count by episode amount is 171, meaning that her misallocation by episode is negative 23. So she has 23 less diary rooms than she should have if we're going for balanced distribution. Diane has an overall diary room count of 225, and her expected count by episode amount is 177, causing her to have a positive 48 misallocation, meaning that she has 48 more diary rooms than she should have if things were evenly distributed. Though it makes sense since she became one of the major narrators and players in the second half of the season. Cowboy has an overall diary room count of 171, and his expected count by episode amount is 182, causing his misallocation to be negative 11, which barely crosses over from the balance to slightly under-edited. But in general, I think he got the amount that he needed, and that fits the amount of screen time that he got. Drew's overall diary room count is 194, and his expected count by episode amount is 182, meaning his misallocation is 12.98, meaning he got 12 or 13 more diary rooms than would have been given if things were balanced. But I think he still barely crossed over into that over edited line where he still got pretty solid distribution, all things said. So the overall season total misallocation, which are all the misallocations by Haskins added together, we have a number of 10. And this kind of makes sense since all the pre-jurors, plus with the exception of Jace, got balanced edits, and a lot of the jurors who even made it to the 11, 12, 13 points in the positive or negative direction, they still got relatively balanced distribution. So this number being this small kind of makes sense. And overall, the percentages of confessionals misallocated are very small, but nowhere near as small as the prior two seasons, so I found that interesting. Though there are just less diary rooms in general from Big Brother 5 onwards, compared to BB2, 3, and 4. So Big Brother 6 has an overall confessional count of 1,746, and the episode sum for this season is 290. And with those numbers, I divided the first from the second to find out the rate by episode sum, and this is 4.19, which rounds out to 4 confessionals, meaning that for every episode, every house guest would have to have 4 confessionals in order to have a balanced edit pertaining confessionals. Ashlia has an overall diary room count of 14. Her expected count by episode amount is 12.57, meaning her misallocation by episode is 1.42, which means she has a balanced distribution. Michael has an overall diary room count of 35. His expected count by episode amount is 25.15, meaning his misallocation by episode is 9.84, meaning that he has a balanced diary room distribution. Eric has an overall diary room count of 77, and his expected count by episode amount is 37.73, meaning his misallocation amount is 39, meaning that he's pretty over edited when it comes to his distribution, but it's nowhere near the largest one. Sarah has an overall diary room count of 79, and her expected count by episode amount is 62.89, meaning her misallocation by episode is 16.10, which means she got a bit more distribution, but not much. Kesar has an overall diary room count of 139, and his expected count by episode amount is 62.89, meaning that he has a misallocation by episode of 76.10, meaning that he got twice the amount of diary rooms that he should have gotten. But I think due to him being nominated so many times and being H definitely bloated a lot of those numbers. Jennifer's overall diary room count is 65. Her expected count by episode amount is 79.66, meaning her misallocation by episode is negative 14.66, meaning that she has less diary rooms than she should have, meaning that she has a negative balance. Rachel has an overall diary room count of 128. Her expected count by episode amount is 88.05, meaning her misallocation by episode is 39, which is a pretty decent gap. James has an overall diary room count of 170, and his expected count by episode amount is 96.44, causing his misallocation by episode to be 73.55, meaning that he has almost twice the amount of diary rooms that he should have if they wanted to give a balanced edit. But James is hilarious as heck and he gives witty diary room and commentary, so I get why they gave him so much. Bo's overall diary room count is at 61, and his expected count by episode amount is 100.63, causing his misallocation by episode to be negative 39.63, which means he has pretty much almost half of the amount of diary rooms that he should have, which is a very bad imbalance, and it might be one of the worst in history, though we'll see if that holds up as we go through the seasons. Howie has an overall diary room count of 185. His expected count by episode amount is 109, causing his misallocation by episode to be 75.97. And this is definitely one of the biggest bloated over edits pertaining diary rooms that we have so far. And they found him funny, so I guess it makes sense. So April has an overall diary room count of 159, and her expected count by episode amount is 117.04, meaning her misallocation by episode is 41.95, which is a pretty decent over balance, but it's not the largest. Janelle has an overall diary room count of 210, and her expected count by episode amount is 121.6, causing her misallocation to be 88.39. And this is one of the largest, if not the largest number so far when it comes to the overdistribution of diary rooms up to this point. Who's going to beat that is Yvette, who has an overall diary room count of 230, and her expected count by episode amount is 125.79. Her misallocation by episode is 104.2, meaning she has over 100 diary rooms than she should have if this was to be a bounce edit. And I'm pretty sure this is the largest number by far, since none of the others, not even BB2 Will or BB3 Danielle, made it to the hundreds in the misallocations. Maggie has an overall diary room count of 194, and her expected count by episode amount is 125.79, causing her misallocation by episode to be 68.2, which is a pretty large amount despite her lack of presence. So I added all the misallocations of the season to create a season total misallocation number, and this one is very large, where it is 580.68. None of the other prior seasons had numbers that were this large, and this caused for the percentage of confessionals misallocated to be 0.33, meaning a third of the diary rooms in this season were misallocated poorly. Obviously, this really shows the first season that is hugely imbalanced when it comes to the editing, but it will be interesting to see if more seasons end up like this in the future regarding the future eras, or if the prior four seasons are more common when it comes to the overall edit of Big Brother Diary Rooms. So now we are moving on to Big Brother 7, and the overall confessionals in this season is 1,362. So being consistent with the last two seasons with that amount. And the episode sum is 260, where I added all of the amount of episodes that each contestant was in to create that number. The rate by episode sum is 5.23, rounding to 5 confessionals that every house guest should have gotten in every episode for there to have been a balanced edit. Allison has an overall diary room count of 24, and her expected count by episode amount is 15.71, meaning that she has an 8.28 misallocation by episode, which is a pretty fair distribution without getting overexposed. Nokomis has an overall diary room count of 23, and her expected count by episode amount is 31.43, causing her to have a negative 8.43 misallocation, just barely missing out on being under-edited. Jace has an overall diary room count of 51, with an expected count by episode amount being 47.14, causing him to have a 3.85 misallocation by episode, so he has that pretty close to perfect ratio. Diane has an overall diary room count of 44 diary rooms, where her expected count by episode amount is 62.86, causing her to be the first one in the red of this season pertaining to misallocation, as she has negative 18.86 less than she should have for a fair edit. Kesa has an overall diary room count of 42, and his expected count by episode amount is 78.57. This causes a huge misallocation for him, as his is negative 36.57, meaning that he only has a bit more than half of the diary rooms that he should have gotten for a fair, balanced edit. So Marcellus has an overall diary room count of 62, and his expected count by the amount of episodes he lasted is 94.29, causing for a negative 32.29 misallocation, meaning that he only got two-thirds of the amount of diary rooms that he should have gotten for a fair distribution edit. Howie really isn't much different, as his overall diary room count is also 62. His expected count by episode amount is 99.53, and his misallocation is negative 37.53, meaning that he missed out on almost half of the amount of diary rooms that he should have gotten. And this is kind of a consistent thing with this season and last season that I'm looking over the numbers. James has an overall diary room count of 109. His expected count by episode amount is 110, causing him to only have a negative 1 misallocation, meaning that his distribution for diary rooms is borderline close to perfect. Danielle has an overall 60 167 diary room count, with her expected count by episode amount being 125.72, meaning her misallocation by episode amount is 41, so she still got over edited when it comes to the diary rooms, but she's funny and charismatic as heck, so it makes sense. Chicken George is pretty much the opposite, as his overall diary room count is 84. His expected count by episode amount is also 125.72, but his misallocation is negative 41.72, meaning that he missed out on a third of the diary rooms that he should have gotten for a balanced edit. But it kind of makes sense since he just didn't have much going for him. So Will has an overall diary room count of 213, with an expected count by episode amount being 136.2, causing for a misallocation of 76.8. This isn't surprising since he is pretty much the star and the main strategist of the season, and he's very charismatic. So this number is fitting, but it's nowhere near the largest, which actually shocked me. Janelle has an overall diary room count of 177, where her expected count by episode amount is 141.43, causing her misallocation by episode to be 35.56. Erica has an overall diary room count of 110. Her expected count by episode amount is 146.67, causing for a negative 36.67 misallocation. Mike has an overall diary room count of 194, with an expected count by episode amount being 146.67, and his misallocation by episode being 47.32, which is a decent amount, I guess. So shockingly, when I added all the misallocations by Haskins together, I got pretty much a perfect edit or perfect misallocation since it's just a bunch of zeros. And I think this might have to do with the fact that there's no one who had twice the amount of diary rooms that they should have, like Yvette in season 6, and no one crossed that 100 misallocation by episode amount. And while certain people were under edited in this season, it was nowhere close to some of the others in BB6. So I think that's why the number here is so much smaller. So, for Big Brother 8, the overall confessionals in the season is 1,269, and the episode sum, where I used to add up all the episodes that each contestant was in, is 299. I divided the former by the latter to get the rate by episode sum, which is essentially for confessionals. So Carol has 21 episodes in the short amount of time she was on the season, and the expected count by episode amount for her is 16.97. So this gives her a misallocation by 4 episodes, which is a good range. So if you are in between 10 over and 10 under, when it comes to the misallocation, you have a fairly balanced confessional distribution count. Joe received 38 confessionals and his expected count by episode amount is 29, meaning that he got a misallocation by 8.29. So he's in that perfect median as well. Mike's overall confessional count, diary room count, is 16, and the expected count by episode amount for him is 42. This is a huge negative misallocation, as he received 26 less confessionals than he should have if the distribution of the confessionals were balanced. And I think he's in the running for one of the most under-edited people ever. Nick received 36 confessionals during his time on the season, and the expected count by episode amount for him is 55. This leads to a negative misallocation of 19, meaning that he got 19 confessionals less than he should have. And the final person in the pre-jury is Kale, who received 78 confessionals during the season, and the expected count by episode amount for her is 67.9. This means that she has a misallocation of 10 confessionals, meaning that she got 10 more confessionals than she should have. And she's literally barely above that perfect median where they have a fair edit or fair distribution. But even 10.09, where it's barely green, is still good. Preston received 67 confessionals during his time on the season, and the expected cap by episode amount for him is 80 confessionals, causing for a negative 13.63 misallocation by episode amount for him. So he's under that median where it officially means that he's under edited. Jen received 78 confessionals during the season, and her expected cap by episode amount is 93.37, causing her to have a negative misallocation by 15 less confessionals than she should have regarding the distribution. Amber got 100 confessionals on the season, and the expected count by episode amount for her is 106, meaning that she's missing 6 confessionals, but she's still in that perfectly distributed median. Jessica received 115 confessionals, and her expected count by episode amount is 18, meaning she's just missing 3 confessionals, and meaning that she's very close to having a perfectly distributed confessional diary room count. Eric received 143 confessionals, and his expected count by episode amount is 118, causing him to have a 24.16 misallocation, meaning that he has 24 more diary rooms than he should have. But he's America's player and kind of drove a lot of the plot of the season, so this kind of just makes sense. Jamaica received 104 diary rooms in the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 127, causing her to have a negative 23 misallocation amount, which causes her to be under-edited. But she is not the most under-edited. Zach received 97 diary rooms throughout the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 131. This causes him to have a negative 34.5 misallocation, and I believe, based off of this result, he's the second most under-edited of the season behind Mike, way back down the list. Danielle received 192 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 140, meaning that she gained 50 additional diary rooms than her average would have led to if you're going by a fairly distributed edit. Last but not least is Evil Dick, and his overall confessional diary room count is 184. His expected count by episode is the same as his daughter's, regarding it being 140, and his misallocation by episode amount is 43, meaning that he got that much more diary room, causing him to have a bloated distribution. But it's very clear that they made sure that it's done out of the show, and the diary rooms were one of the ways that they made it happen. So these were the results when I added all the misallocations together, and these are also the results when I divided it by the episode sum. And this shows that when it comes to the overall amount of misallocations, it's in general very low, despite some getting more than they should and others getting less than they should have, if we are distributing them evenly. So the overall confessional count for Big Brother 9 is 1,313, and the episode sum is 286. So dividing the former by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 4.59, and I'm rounding that up to 5 confessionals. So the average confessional count for each episode for each castmate, in order to have a balanced distribution, would be 5. So Jacob has an overall confessional count of 5, and his expected count by episode amount is 9, causing him to have a negative 4 misallocation, but that's in the perfect range when it comes to a balanced edit. Neil is the only person in Big Brother history to have no confessional counts, and expected count by episode amount for him is 18.36. So obviously we would have negative 18.36 due to the fact of him having none. So, very bad. Jen has an overall diary room count of 37. Her expected count by episode amount is 22.95. So she has 14 more diary rooms than she should have had. Though obviously this happened due to her being nominated and being a part of the Power Couple twist. And being a part of the main twist of the season. Parker has 31 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is the same as Jen's since they got booted together. But it causes him to have an episode count misallocation of 8. So he has 8 more confessionals than he should have, but he's still in that accurately edited range. Amanda has 38 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 36. So she is in the perfect range, as she only has 2 more diary rooms than necessary. And it's pretty much the same with Alex, though he has 39, and he has an additional diary room more than she does, where his misallocation by episode amount is 2.27, where hers is 1.27. So we're moving on to the last P. Jarrett and Allison, where her overall diary room count is 52. Her expected count by episode amount is 50.5, meaning that she has a misallocation by episode amount of 1.5. So very balanced. Matt has an overall diary room count of 96. His expected count by episode amount is 78.04, meaning that he has a plus 17 misallocation amount, meaning that he's in the green tier of being over edited based on the distribution. Chelsea has a diary room count of 66. Her expected count by episode amount is 91.8, so essentially 92, causing her to have a negative 25 misallocation amount and putting her in the under-edited category. Joshua has 121 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 105, causing him to have a 15.4 misallocation, putting him in the over-distributed category. James received 119 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 19. So essentially, he got the perfect distribution and has the perfect edit when it comes to the diary room. And it's very rare for someone to have this. Though, if I was to be technical, his number is negative 0.3636. But if you round it down, it's 0. Natalie has an overall diary room count of 131. Her expected count by episode amount is 133, causing her to have negative 2 misallocation diary rooms, so she's in the perfect range. Sharon has 105 diary rooms. Her expected count by the amount of episodes she lasted in is 137, causing her to have a negative 32 misallocation diary rooms, so she's very under-edited in this regard. Sheila has 190 diary rooms. Her expected count by episode amount is 146.9, and she has an additional 43 diary rooms due to the misallocation, meaning that she has a huge bloated edit. Ryan has 138 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 151, causing him to be in the negative 13.5. So he is a bit under edited in this regard, but not too much. Adam's also pretty under-edited once you look into it. Since he has 135 diary rooms, his expected count by episode amount is also 151.5, causing him to have a negative 16.5 misallocation. When you add it all together when it comes to the misallocations, the season has a negative 9.9992 misallocation, and dividing that by the sum, you have a negative 0.007 when it comes to the percentages of confessionals misallocated. So essentially, is that 7%? No. It's one of the higher numbers, but it's not a whole lot. And when you look at it, a lot of people on this season got a balanced edit, but there's a few people who got a lot of negatives, and it kind of just added up here, and not many people who had overbloated diary room. So hopefully that all makes sense. So Big Brother 10 had a smaller cast, smaller amount of days in the season, smaller weeks, leading to smaller confessionals, as the overall confessionals for the season is 988, and the episode sum is 219, causing for a rate by episode sum of 4.511, but rounding that up, it is a rate by episode sum of 5. So that is the average that everyone would get in each episode if the diary rooms were distributed evenly. Ryan had an overall diary room count of 19, and his expected count by episode amount is 13.53, causing for a misallocation of 5.46, meaning that he is in the decent median where he has an accurate amount of diary room distribution. Steven has a diary room count of 22, and his expected count by episode amount is 27.06, causing for a misallocation by episode of negative 5. So he's still in that perfect range of 10 to negative 10 of having an evenly distributed diary room count. Angie has 28 diary rooms overall, and her expected count by episode amount is 40.6, causing her to have a misallocation of -12, causing her to just be put in the red mark where you are officially under edited. Jesse has a diary room count of 57, while his expected count by episode amount is 54.13, causing for a misallocation of 2.86, meaning that he's very close to having a perfectly distributed diary room count. So we have a streak of under-edited or under-distributed jurors when it comes to the diary rooms. Libra has 48 diary rooms overall. Her expected count by episode amount is 67.67, causing her to have a -19.6, so almost a -20 diary room misallocation amount. April is also pretty similar, where her overall diary room count is 63, and her expected count by episode amount is 81.2, causing her to have a -18 misallocation amount. But they just grow larger from here on out. Michelle has a diary room count of 56, where her expected count by episode amount is 94.73. This causes her to have a -38 misallocation, which is almost half of the diary rooms that she should have, or it's pretty damn close to almost half. Ollie has 64 diary rooms where his expected count by episode amount is the same as Michelle's, which is 94.739, and he has a -30 misallocation amount, so that's still a large amount as well, where he's missing a third of the diary rooms that he should have. Granny has 69 diary rooms. Her expected count by episode amount is 108, and she has a -39 misallocation, which is damn near 40% less than she should have. So that's pretty interesting. Things definitely do get better from here on out. Rakisha has 114 diary rooms overall. Her expected count by episode amount is 117.29, so she's in that perfect median where she's just missing 3.29 diary rooms. Jerry has 103 diary rooms overall, and his expected count by episode amount is 121.8, causing him definitely to be in the red, where he has -18.8 misallocation amount, or that's the number of his misallocation. Memphis has 135 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 130.83, causing him to have a misallocation by 4.16. Here is where things definitely get imbalanced. Dan overall has 220 diary rooms, where his expected count by episode amount is 130.83, causing him to have a misallocation by episode amount of 89.16. So he essentially has roughly around 40 to 45% more diary rooms than he should have if my numbers are accurate. And just by looking at the cast and the numbers that I've relayed, he is the only person in the green, where everyone is either in the yellow or the red. So he is extremely over edited. So we have a season that finally beat Big Brother 6 with being the most misallocated season yet when it comes to the percentages, where the total misallocation amount that I used by adding all the 13 house guest scores is -84.73, and dividing that by the episode sum, essentially, I got 0.386, meaning that's the percentage of the amount of diary rooms that were misallocated in the season. And honestly, it's really Dan's fault, since they gave him way too much and a lot of the others way too little. So we are approaching the middle of this video and era with Big Brother 11, which had 1,198 confessionals overall with a 251 episode sum. So the rate by episode sum for each house guest for each episode is 4.77, but that rounds up to 5, so that's where we're starting off with. So Braden got 13 diary rooms over the course of his journey, and his expected catch by episode amount is 19.09, meaning that he got 6.09 less diary rooms than he should have, but this causes for a perfect median regarding his misallocation. Laura got 30 diary rooms during her time on Big Brother, and the expected count by episode amount for her is 33.41, causing her to have a negative 3.41 misallocation, which is pretty damn close to a perfect distribution amount. Casey got 60 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 47.72, causing for him to have a misallocation by episode amount of 12.27. So he just got out of that perfect range where he's a bit over edited. And when you really think about it, there's really not much reason because he really wasn't relevant during the 3 weeks he was in the game. And the final juror for the season is Ronnie, who has an overall count of 82, and his expected count by episode amount is 62.04, causing him to have a 19.95 over edit regarding the misallocation by episode amount. And obviously this makes sense just due to the amount of chaos he caused during the season. So, yeah. So, moving on to the jurors, Jesse got 65 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 76.36, causing him to barely miss out on the perfect range, as he got a negative 11.36 misallocation amount. So, he is very slightly under edited when it comes to the distribution. Chima got 55 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount was, or is, 85.91. This causes her to be severely under-edited, where she has a negative 30.91 misallocation amount. And I think one of the reasons why this happened is because the producers just didn't like her and couldn't really trust what she could say. Lydia got 77 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 90.68, causing her to have a negative 13.68 misallocation amount. So she just became slightly under-distributed. Russell got 141 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 105 diary rooms. This causes him to have a 35.99 misallocation amount. And you can definitely tell that they enjoyed him because he's such a unique person and house guest, and there really isn't anyone like him. So they kind of threw him in there whenever they could. And he caused a lot of the motion as well. Jeff got 147 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 119. This causes him to have a 27.67 misallocation amount. This really isn't a surprise with how much the producers liked Jeff and how his likability and edit caused him to get the coup d'etat. And yeah, this really shouldn't shock anyone. I'm shocked it isn't more, to be honest. Michelle got 109 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 128.86, causing her to have a negative 19.86 misallocation amount. Kevin got 190 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 143.18, causing him to have a 46.81 misallocation amount. This is huge, and I think this might be one of the largest misallocation amounts in general. So I really wasn't expecting this number. Natalie has 99 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 143.18. This causes her to have a misallocation amount by negative 44.18. So this means that she's missing essentially a third of the diary rooms that she should have if this were to be evenly distributed. Last but not least is Jordan, who has 133 diary rooms overall, 130. Her expected count by episode amount is 143.18. This causes her to be negatively under-edited when it comes to the distribution, as she has a negative 13.18 misallocation amount. So these are the numbers when it comes to misallocation. It is very, very small, meaning that the distribution is pretty even overall. So yeah. So we are officially halfway through the era, and the next season that we are going to cover is Big Brother 12, which has 1,422 overall confessionals and the episode 255. This causes for a rate by episode sum of 5.57 confessionals, and rounding that up, it means 6 confessionals is the average amount that they would need per episode per each house guest to have a balanced edit. So on to the pre-jurors. Annie has 22 diary rooms. Her expected count by episode amount is 22.3 per episode. Her misallocation by episode is negative zero point 0.3, so essentially zero. So technically, she has a perfect confessional count based on the amount of episodes that she lasted in. Monet got 22 confessionals, so the same amount as Annie, which is bad, despite her lasting a week longer. And her expected count by episode amount is 39.03, so 39 confessionals essentially. This causes her to have a negative 17 misallocation, meaning that she has 17 less than she should, so she is officially under-distributed with her diary rooms. Andrew has 52 diary rooms, and his overall or expected episode amount based on the diary rooms that he should have is 55.76. This causes him to have a negative 3.76 misallocation, meaning that he's missing essentially 3 to 4 diary rooms in order to be distributed evenly. Kristen has 31 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 72.49, and this is awful. Her misallocation by episode is negative 41, meaning that she is missing over half of the amount of diary rooms that she would need to have in order to have even distribution, which is just horrendous. This might be one of the biggest gaps ever, but we will see once we finish going through everyone. So now we're moving on to the jurors. Rachel has 132 diary rooms. Her expected count by episode amount is 89.22, meaning that she has a misallocation by episode of 42, meaning that she is overly distributed, but it does make sense since she was on the block for 2 of the 5 weeks, and then she won HOH in 2 of the other 5 weeks, and she's just a very big personality. So everything I said about Kristen, I could just eat my words because Kathy has 39 diary rooms and her expected count by episode amount is 105.95. This causes for a negative 66 misallocation, which means that she is missing 2/3 of the diary rooms that she should have if the season was evenly distributed with the diary rooms. Literally, I don't think anyone will beat Kathy in this regard. And this is just utterly horrendous. Though you can kind of understand because she really wasn't involved in the dynamics of the season like that. Matt has 128 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 122, meaning that he's essentially missing 5.31 diary rooms, but he's still in that perfect median range. Brandon has 136 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 122, causing him to have a 13 misallocation, which is just barely above the average, and causes him to have a bit higher distribution. Reagan has 115 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 139.14, causing him to have a negative 24 misallocation amount, so he has less distribution than he should. Brittany has 203 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 150.56, causing her to have a misallocation by episode amount of 52. And it makes sense since they use a lot of her diary rooms for comedic and narration, so pretty explainable. Enzo has 211 diary rooms, and he has an expected count by episode amount of 167.29. This causes him to have a 43.7 misallocation by episode amount. And what's interesting about him is that he was never HOH throughout the season, unlike his allies. And it says a lot that he has so many more diary rooms than his other brigade allies that made it to the end. But I think it's because they generally found him to be more interesting and a better narrator. Lane has 150 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 167.29, causing him to have a negative 17 misallocation by episode. So he's definitely a bit under-edited and under-distributed. Hayden has 181 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 167.29, causing for a 13 misallocation, so he's a bit above that average balance rate. So adding everything up, the total misallocation for the season is 0.267, and then you divide that by the episode sum, and you have 0.0010 percentage of the confessionals misallocated for the season. Big Brother 1,418 confessionals, and it has an episode sum of 267. So dividing the former by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 5.31, and that is rounded down to 5 confessionals. So, Evil Dick got 14 episodes during his time on the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 15.93, meaning that he has a negative 1.93 misallocation by episode, so he's still in that perfect median where he got fair distribution. Keith got 32 confessionals during his time on the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 21.24. This means that he has an allocation or misallocation of 10.75, meaning that he got that many more confessionals, and he literally just made it over to having a bit too much distribution by a very little bit. Cassie has 26 confessionals or diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 37.17, meaning that she just missed the mark of being in that perfect range where she has negative 11.17 misallocation regarding her diary rooms. Dominic has 76 diary rooms, and he has an expected count by episode amount of 53.10. This means that he has a misallocation by episode of 22.89, meaning that he got essentially 23 extra confessionals and diary rooms, and he has a bit too much in comparison. Lawan has 46 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 69.04, meaning that he has a misallocation of negative 23, meaning that he has that many diary rooms that he is missing in order to have a balanced edit, and he is under-distributed. Brendan has 79 confessionals, and he has an expected count by episode amount of 69.4. This means that he has a misallocation by episode amount of 9.95, so he's barely still in that fairly evenly distributed by episode diary room counts, where if he literally got 0.6 more, he would be in the overly distributed, but he's still in that fine range. Danielle has 139 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 116. This means that her misallocation by episode is 22.16, meaning that she got 22 extra diary rooms, and she essentially is a bit bloated when it comes to the diary room distribution. But she is nothing compared to Jeff, who got 176 diary rooms, and his expected count by amount is 116.83, meaning that he has a misallocation by 59.16. So essentially, he got a third more diary rooms than he should have, and he probably has the most bloated amount of diary rooms out of anyone in the season. Shelly got 114 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 132. So essentially, she's missing 18.77 diary rooms. And it's pretty similar with Kalia, who got 124 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 143.39. And she is missing 19.39 diary rooms. And this is pretty much the case with a lot of the newbies who made it a decent way throughout the season. Jordan got 132 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 148.7. This means that she is under-distributed with a negative 16 misallocation overall. Adam got 140 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 154.01, causing him to have a negative 14.01 misallocation. Portia has 106 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 154.01, causing her to have a huge misallocation by episode amount of negative 48.01, and this is one of the largest misallocations ever. And she's essentially missing a third of the diaries that she should have in order for this to be fairly balanced and distributed. Rachel was able to get 214 diary rooms, and she has an expected count by episode amount of 154, where she has a misallocation by episode amount of 59.98. So essentially, 60 more diary rooms than she should have, and her distribution is very bloated. So you will notice the huge distribution issues here. With the season total misallocations, which is all the misallocations by Haskins added together, we have a number of 31.86. And then once you divide that by the total sum, or the sum by episode, you have a percentage of total misallocated confessionals being 0.11. I don't think you guys get what this means. This means 11% of the diary rooms and confessionals this season are misallocated and are hugely imbalanced. This is definitely one of the larger numbers so far. This season having one of the largest imbalances is clearly due to the veteran and newbie dynamic, and this was definitely what the producers intended. Big Brother 14 has 1,477 confessionals, and the episode sum is 301. So I divided the former with the latter and got the rate by episode sum of 4.9, which rounds up to 5 confessionals, which is the average that each contestant should get for each episode. So Jody got 4 confessionals, and her expected count by episode amount is 4.90, whatever. It's the rate by episode sum, technically, since she was only on one episode. This causes for a misallocation by episode amount of negative 0.906. So essentially, she's in the median since she got essentially the perfect distribution based on the episodes that she was in. Kara overall got 13 confessionals, and her expected count by episode amount is 19.62. This causes for a misallocation of negative 6.627. Willie has 37 confessionals diary rooms in a season, or during his time on the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 24.53. This causes him to have a 12.46 misallocation, meaning that he is in the green scale based on being a bit too distributed. JoJo got 23 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 34.348. Causing her to have a negative 11.34 misallocation, meaning that she's missing that amount of diary rooms in order to have a balanced edit, and she is underdistributed. Janelle got 51 confessionals throughout the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 63.79, causing her to have a negative 12.79 misallocation by episode. And this clearly just shows to me that she really wasn't in production's favor to the point where they needed to shove her in everywhere compared to her prior 2 seasons. Will got 51 confessionals and diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 78.51, causing him to have a negative 27.51 misallocation amount. So he was very underutilized, and he has a bad distribution when it comes to his diary rooms. Mike Boogie got 125 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 93.23. His misallocation by episode amount is 29.76, so he got more than he needed to. Ashley got 44 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 93.23. This number is horrible, as she is missing 49 diary rooms, and her misallocation amount is negative 49. So technically, she is missing more than half of the amount of diary rooms that she should have gotten if they're going to make this evenly distributed. But I do get why they did this, since she really just didn't offer much of anything to the show or the game. Brittany got 137 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 107.95. So she has a 29.4 misallocation amount. And this really isn't surprising since she's known as one of the diary room queens of the season. So of course they're going to shove in as many diary rooms of hers as they can. Frank got 181 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 122.67. This causes for a misallocation of 58.32. So this really isn't surprising. It's clear that production really loved him. He was either nominated or HOH essentially every single week. So obviously he's going to get a lot of diary room time because he was so relevant in the season and he was a cannonball for drama. Joe got 77 diary rooms and his expected count by episode amount is 122.67, causing for a negative 45 misallocation by episode, and this is one of the larger ones. Jen got 75 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 132.48. This causes her to have a misallocation by episode amount of negative 57.48. So she is missing almost half the amount of diary rooms that she should have gotten. But this really isn't surprising because she really wasn't relevant in the game. And I think she had a quieter personality than production thought she was going to have. Shane got 135 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 137.39. So he's essentially missing 2 diary rooms based on the misallocation, but he's pretty close to being evenly distributed with his diary rooms. Danielle got 150 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 147.209. So she essentially got 3 more confessionals than needed, since her misallocation by episode amount is 2.79, but she's still in that perfect median range. Dan got 204 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 147.209, causing him to have a 56.79 misallocation amount, and essentially got 25% more diary rooms than he should have gotten, but this really isn't shocking since the producers clearly loved Dan, and he was so relevant when it comes to the gameplay and the moves of the season, so this was bound to happen. Ian got 170 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 147.209, causing him to have a 22.79 misallocation amount, so he is definitely over-distributed. So adding up all of the misallocations, we have negative 2.000 essentially, and dividing that by the sum, we have a percentage of confessionals misallocated being negative 0.0066. So that is it for BB14. So now it is time to talk about the final season of the post-classic era in Big Brother 15, where the overall confessionals is 1,680 and the episode sum is 375. So I divide the former with the latter, and the rate by episode sum is 4.48, which is rounded down to 4 confessionals or diary rooms, meaning that this is the average that every single player should get in every episode that they are around in order to have an evenly distributed diary room distribution. David got 23 diary rooms in this season, and his expected count by episode amount is 17.92, meaning that he has a 5.08 misallocation, so he's in the perfect range. Nick has 30 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 31.36, meaning that he is in a negative 1.36 misallocation, but he's still in a very, very good range pertaining the average balance. Jeremy has 47 diary rooms, and his expected count is 44.8, meaning that he has 2.2 more diary rooms than needed, but he's still very close to having the average. We have our first underutilized contestant in the diary room section with Caitlin, where she has 33 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 58.24, meaning that she is missing 25.24, and that's the amount that she is misallocated by. Howard has 67 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 71.68, causing for a negative 4.68 misallocation, which is still pretty balanced. Candace has 69 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 85.12, meaning that she's in a negative misallocation by 16.12, or negative 16.12. Jessie has 65 diary rooms, and her expected count is 98.56 based on the amount of episodes that she was in during the season, causing her to have a negative 33.56 misallocation. This means that she's missing about a third of the diary rooms that she should have had if the diary rooms were to be evenly distributed. Helen has 139 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 112, meaning that she has an over misallocation by 27. And this really isn't shocking because she was one of the main narrators during her time on the season. Erin has 151 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 125.44, causing her to have an over misallocation by 25.56. And I feel like she has a lot of these due to the amount of HOHs that she won throughout the season. Since someone that controversial and that's giving them so much negative press, you would think that they would want to under-edit her, but they really couldn't here. Amanda has 191 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 138.88, causing her to have a misallocation amount by 52.12. And clearly, they were trying to make her a favorite at first, as she had good diary rooms and she was a huge narrator, but she became very problematic, and they probably would have wanted to hide her, but they just couldn't, and she was one of the few charismatic people on the season in comparison. Alyssa has 151 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 138.88, causing her to have 12.12 for a misallocation, and that being the amount of diary rooms that she has extra. Judd has 96 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 120.96, causing for a negative 24.96 misallocation amount, so he is underutilized pertaining to diary room. McCrae has 158 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 152.32, causing for a 5.68 misallocation, so he is in that perfect range. Spencer has 167 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 161.28, causing for a 5.72 misallocation by episode overall, or an overall misallocation. Gina Marie has 121 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 161.28, and she has a negative 40.28 misallocation. So this is one of the biggest misallocations by anyone so far, and this might remain, but we'll see in the future. And Andy has 172 diary rooms overall, and his expected count by episode amount is 161.28, causing for a misallocation of 10.72. So he literally just escaped that balanced median where he's slightly, very, very, very slightly overrepresented in this area, which is ironic because he was invisible for the first half of the season. So we have a first here when it comes to adding up the total misallocations, and I did the math twice, and there is 0 misallocations overall, and once you divide 0 by anything else, it is still 0. So there is no percentage of confessionals misallocated. So on paper, this is the most balanced and perfectly distributed season when it comes to the diary room, since there are people who didn't get way too much overall or way too less. And that is how we are going to end this era. So, to start things off, Big Brother 16 has an overall confessional count of 1,899 and a total episode sum of 397, causing for a rate by episode sum of 4.7833, which is rounded up to 5 confessionals, or diary rooms. Jory has 23 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 23.916, causing for a misallocation of minus 0.9168. So it's not even, she doesn't even have a negative 1 diary room count. So her diary room count is very balanced. Paola has 41 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 38.26, costing for a 2.73 misallocation, so she's still in that perfect range where she really isn't under or over edited. Devin has 81 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 52.61, costing for a bloated misallocation of 28.38, which I guess makes sense since he was HOH and he was backdoored in 2 of the 3 weeks, and he was a huge drama magnet. Brittany has 46 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 62.18, costing for a negative 16.18 misallocation amount, so she's definitely under distributed. Amber has 43 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 81.317, causing for a negative 38.31 misallocation. This means that she's missing roughly half of the amount of diary rooms that she needed if things were evenly distributed, so she was hugely under-edited. Things only get worse from here, as Jocasta has 44 diary rooms, but her expected count by episode amount is 90.88, causing for a negative 46.88 misallocation. So she is literally missing more than half of the diary rooms that she needed as well, so hers is even worse than Amber's. And this isn't the worst one of the season yet either. Hayden has 40 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 90.88, and he is missing 50.88 diary rooms, so his misallocation is the hugest out of the 3 that I literally just discussed. Zach has 138 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 119.58, costing for an 18.41 misallocation, so he's a bit over-distributed. Donnie has 140 diary rooms, where his expected count by episode amount is 138.71, causing for a 1.28 misallocation by episode. So his distribution is pretty much close to perfect, as he's only off by 1. Nicole has 144 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 138.71, and her expected count by episode amount is the same as Donnie's because she was away for a week, while her second time she was booed a week after he was, so they were in the same amount of episodes. Anyways, her misallocation by episode amount is 5.28, so she's still in that perfect median. Christine has 104 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 148.28, causing her to be in the negative 44.28 misallocation amount. So she's missing roughly a third of her diary rooms, essentially. Frankie has 256 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 176.98. This means that he has an over-distribution of 79.01, and this really isn't shocking at all, since they really tried to push that him being Ariana's brother meant so much, and him being a social media mogul was so important. Caleb has 217 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 176.98, costing for a misallocation amount of 40, so he definitely was over-distributed as well, but obviously just nowhere near as close as Frankie. Victoria has 109 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 186.55, costing for a negative 77 misallocation amount, and honestly this might be the largest misallocation amount ever, or it's very up there, so this is really, really, really bad, even though she was irrelevant to the game. Though you could say that she was nominated several times, so she should have gotten more. Cody has 205 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 191.33, causing for a bit of an over-distribution amount pertaining to misallocation of 13.66. Derek has 268 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 186.55, causing for an over-bloated misallocation amount of 81.44. So these are the numbers of the total misallocation once I added all of them together, and once I divided it by the episode sum, I got this number. So it's not the highest, it's not the lowest, it's at negative 0.1, so some are more evenly distributed and some are less. On to Big Brother 17, which has 1,744 overall confessionals with a total episode sum of 425, causing for a rate by episode sum of 4.10, which is rounded down to 4 confessionals. So Jace got 17 diary rooms, and his expected count by the amount of episodes he lasted is 20.51, causing for a negative 3.51 misallocation. So he's still in that range of evenly distributedness. Devon got 60 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 32.82, causing for her to have a bloated 27.17 misallocation by episode amount. So she literally got almost double the amount of diary rooms that she needed or should have had if this was balanced. Jeff got 27 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 41.03, causing for a negative 0.14 misallocation, so he was a bit under-distributed. Audrey got 48 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 57.44, causing for a negative 0.944 diary room misallocation amount. And I'm honestly shocked that she was this low, but I'm assuming she didn't get a whole lot during her last week due to that meltdown, and I guess that's why she was very close to being under-edited. Jason got 82 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 65.65, causing for a 16.34 misallocation amount. So he's definitely a bit bloated, but not much. Clay got 60 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 82.07, causing for a negative 22.07 misallocation amount. And that's kind of shocking, but kind of not as well. He definitely did cause a lot of drama and was into the gameplay, but he just wasn't good with diary rooms. I think that explains this here. Shelly got 110 diary rooms during the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 94.38, causing for a 15.61 misallocation, which makes sense because she was nominated her last 2 weeks and she won 2 HOHs. Jackie got 48 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 90.27, causing for a negative 42 misallocation by episode, meaning that she missed half of the amount of diary rooms that she would have needed if things were evenly distributed. Becky got 68 diary rooms throughout the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 102.58, causing for a negative 34.58 diary rooms. And I guess this kind of makes sense because she really wasn't on either alliance, she wasn't causing any drama, and she wasn't really nominated or winning many competitions. Meg got 84 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 131.31, causing for a negative 47 misallocation. James got 162 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 131.31, meaning that he has a misallocation by episode amount of 30.68, and it was clear that the producers weren't thrilled with many of their early to mid jurors, and the fact that he got so much more screen time compared to them just proves that. So Julia got 69 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 119. This causes her to have a negative 50 misallocation, and this kind of makes sense due to the twin twist where she was missing for a lot of the first few weeks, and she wasn't the main twin in the beginning, so she kind of suffered the same thing that Natalie from Big Brother 5 did. But when she came back, she really didn't do much of anything. She really wasn't winning competition, she wasn't active strategically, and she wasn't getting into drama, so that misedit just continued onwards. Austin got 181 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 151.83. So this causes for a misallocation amount of 29.16, and this definitely makes sense due to him having that huge persona and being one of the more strategically implemented house guests of the season. John got 202 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 151.83. This caused him to have a misallocation amount of 50.16. So essentially, yeah, he got a quarter more diary rooms than he should have because I guess they felt like his yelling was entertaining. That's besides the point. Vanessa got 235 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 160, causing for a 74.96 misallocation, and that makes sense since she was the main strategist, personality, and narrator of the season. Liz got 156 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 151.83, causing for a 4.16 misallocation. So her distribution regarding her diary rooms are very consistent and balanced. Steve got 135 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 160.03, causing for a negative 25.03 misallocation by episode. They gave him a lot more diary rooms at the last third of the season, but this misallocation was a lot larger in the beginning of the season because he really just didn't have much, and they clearly gave him content because they needed to. Okay, so as you see here, this was the total misallocation once I added all the misallocations of the 17 house guests up, and once I divided that by the episode sum, the number was way too small, so yeah, that's all I have for Big Brother 17. Big Brother 18 has 1,851 overall confessionals with an episode sum of 413. And with the former being divided by the latter, we have an overall rate by episode sum of 4.48. So this is the average amount of confessionals or diary rooms that someone should have in each episode if things were evenly distributed. Glenn has 16 confessionals throughout the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 8.96, causing for a misallocation amount of 7.03, which is still in the right median. Josiah has 29 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 22.4, causing for a 6.59 misallocation, which is still in the nice median. Bronte got 40 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 49.3. She just misses the under misallocated amount as she has a negative 9.3 misallocation by episode. Tiffany has 70 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 62.74, causing for a 7.25 misallocation by episode. So she is in the range of most pre-jurors where they are all relatively evenly distributed. Frank definitely breaks it here as he has 97 diary rooms and an expected count by episode amount of 80.6, causing for an over misallocation amount by 16, which makes sense since he is a vet, but based on how they felt about him in Big Brother 14, this is kind of less than you would expect. So Devon got 144 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 94.11. This causes for a huge misallocation of 49.881, and this really isn't shocking because they clearly saw her as one of the diary room queens of the franchise, and she's also a vet. This means that she got a third more, or 34% more diary rooms than she should have gotten based off of this. Zakia got 39 diary rooms throughout the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 107.56. This causes for a misallocation of negative 68, meaning that she's missing 2/3 of the diary rooms that she should have had. Things don't get much better for Bridget, as she got 55 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 107.56, causing for a negative 552.56 misallocation, meaning that she's essentially missing half of the confessionals that she should have gotten if things were evenly distributed. Polly got 151 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 121. This causes him to have a 29.99 misallocation by episode, and this clearly isn't shocking since he is one of the standout newbies, whether you liked or hated him, and he's one of the better narrators, and he was more relevant, so this kind of just makes sense. So the trend for the early to mid jurors, on average having poor diary room distribution, continues with Michelle, as she got 96 diary rooms and her expected count by episode amount is 152.38, causing her to have a negative 56.38 misallocation, meaning that she's missing a third of the diary rooms that she should have had if things were fairly distributed. Natalie got 120 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 165.82 diary rooms. This causes for a misallocation of negative 45.82. Honestly, this is still pretty bad, but it could have been a lot worse, especially compared to some of the other women newbies in the season. But this is clearly not good. Victor got 177 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 147.9. This causes him to have a 29.09 misallocation, so he is definitely over distributed. Corey got 116 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 179.27, causing for a negative 63.27 misallocation amount. And I don't know about the numbers for sure, but I'm pretty sure he's missing a third of the diary rooms that he should have had. And I believe he is the only male newbie on the cast that has a negative misallocation, especially one of this magnitude. So, yeah. James has 179 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 188.23, causing for a misallocation of negative 9.23. So he barely managed to stay in that nice median. Things get ridiculous with Paul, as Paul got 293 diary rooms and expected episode count or episode amount based off the diary count of 188.23. He essentially has a misallocation by episode amount of 104.76. I don't think anyone has this large of a misallocation in a positive direction. So he just got shoved in our faces all the way around to an obnoxious point of view. Nicole got 229 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 188.23, causing for a 40.76 misallocation. And this really isn't that much of a shock since she is a veteran and they like her anyways. And Nicole knew what to do for the diary room to get to the narration that they wanted, despite her not being the best diary room person. So the total season misallocation, which I did by adding all the misallocation for a house guest, is 5.15, and then I divided that by the episode sum, and I got the number that's showing at the very bottom. So, yeah. Big Brother 19 brings us right into the middle of the era where it has 1,811 overall diary rooms and the episode sum is 418. And dividing the former by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 4.332 confessionals per episode per every house guest. Cameron got 12 diary rooms throughout the season. His expected count by episode amount is 4.33, causing for a 7.66 misallocation, which is still in the right median. Megan got 18 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 12.99, causing for a misallocation of 5, essentially. Jillian got 24 diary rooms, and she has an expected count of 21.66, causing for a 2.3 misallocation, so she is in that medium range. Dominique got 33 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 47.65, causing for a negative 14.65 misallocation, and this kind of makes sense since she really only got focused on her last week, but she was close to being in the perfect median. Ramsey's got 44 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 64.98, causing for a negative 20.98 misallocation. And this makes sense since he really wasn't relevant throughout the season. Jessica got 119 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 90.98, causing for a 28.01 misallocation, which makes sense since she was a huge part of the pre-jury of the season. Cody got 154 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 90.98. This means that he has a misallocation by episode amount of 63.01, and that means he got definitely about 35 to 40% more diary rooms than he should have had, but it makes sense since he caused a lot of drama in the season. He was head of household for the first week, he won some competitions, he was in a very prominent showman and was very prominent on the during his time there. Elena got 63 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 103.98, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of negative 40.98, meaning that she's missing roughly 40% of the amount of diary rooms that she needed in order for this to be evenly distributed. Mark got 116 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 121.31, causing for a negative 5.31 misallocation, so he is in the perfect median/range when it comes to distribution. Matt got 72 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 134.3, causing for a negative 62.3 misallocation. He's literally missing almost half of the amount of diary rooms that he needed in order to have even distribution, but it kind of makes sense since he was just not relevant at all. Jason got 153 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 147.3, causing for a 5.69 misallocation, causing him to be in the perfect median range. Raven got 50 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 147.3. This causes her to have a negative 97.3 misallocation, so she's literally missing about 2/3, i.e. 67% of the diary rooms that she needed in order to have an evenly distributed edit. Alex got 178 diary rooms. Her expected count by episode amount is 155.97, causing for a 22.02 misallocation by episode. And this kind of makes sense because they wanted to paint her in the best light as possible, and she won a decent amount of competitions. Kevin got 88 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 160.3, causing for a negative 72.3 misallocation. And this kind of makes sense because he, like Raven and Matt, really weren't relevant to the ongoings of the season. So, yeah. Christmas got 140 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 168.96, causing for a negative 28.96 misallocation out. And honestly, I am kind of shocked at this. I thought she would have had more diary rooms and a more balanced edit. So Paul got 324 diary rooms, and his or their expected count by episode amount is 168.96, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of 155.03. I'm pretty sure Paul beat his or their record when it comes to this, since I believe Paul on BB18 had the highest misallocation in the positive direction, and Paul's second iteration just beat it for sure. And it was clearly Paul's season, so this all really makes sense. Josh got 223 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 168.96, causing for a 54.03 misallocation by episode amount, and this all just makes sense. So this is the number pertaining the total misallocation and the percentage of confessionals misallocated. There really isn't much to say overall. Big Brother 20 got 1,749 confessionals and 421 episode sum number, or that's the episode sum number. And dividing the former by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 4.15. So that causes for an average of 4 confessionals per contestant per episode. Steve got 31 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 20.77, causing for a 10.22 misallocation by episode amount. So he literally went up to green by 0.22%. Swaggy got 56 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 33.23, causing for a misallocation amount of 22.76. And this really shouldn't be surprising if you just watch those first few weeks. Winston got 45 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 45.69, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of negative 0.69833. And he's probably the closest person to having a perfect distribution by the number. So yeah, that's very impressive. Caitlin got 70 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 58.16, causing for her to have a misallocation amount of 11.83, so she just made it over the balanced median. Rachel got 34 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 70.62, causing for a misallocation of negative 36.62. This causes her to miss a bit more than half of the diary rooms that she needed in order to have an evenly distributed edit. Bailey got 89 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 83.08, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of 5.91, so she is in that nice median range. Rockstar got 59 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 95.55, causing for a negative 36.55 misallocation amount. A part of me is shocked by this because she is so unique, but a part of me isn't either since she really didn't win any competitions. She wasn't in power, and I feel like her allies were a bit more dynamic in comparison. Fessel got 118 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 120.47. This causes him to have a misallocation amount of negative 2.47, so he's very close to having the perfect distribution, though he's still in the balanced distribution. Scotty got 104 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 120.47, causing for a negative 16.47 misallocation. Haley got 190 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 145.4. This causes her to have a 44.59 misallocation amount, and this really isn't surprising because during the second half of her run on the season, she was the figurehead of the Underdog Alliance and the Underdog role, and she was the last one standing, so yeah, this makes sense. So many reds just looking at this. So Brett got 118 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 145.4, causing for a negative 27.4 misallocation by episode. A part of me is shocked, and a part of me is not shocked by this number. While I was editing his video, there really wasn't much content on him, and while he is funnier than all of his allies, they got a lot more of the narration, and by they, I mainly mean Tyler, especially in the first half of the season, and in the second half, Angela and Casey stepped it up where he didn't. Samantha got 120 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 153.71, causing for a negative 33.71 misallocation, and this really isn't surprising because she really wasn't relevant to the dynamics or the gameplay of the season, and it didn't seem like production liked her much anyways, and probably just found it to be exhausting. Angela got 127 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 157.86, causing for a negative 30.86 misallocation for her. She was essentially invisible for the first half of the season, so it isn't shocking. Though while she did get a bigger edit during the second half, in a lot of ways she was still overshadowed, I guess. JC got 147 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 166.17, causing for a negative 19.17 diary room misallocation amount. Tyler got 303 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 166.17, causing him to have 136.832 misallocation by episode. This means he got roughly double the amount, probably a bit less than double, but around double the amounts that he should have gotten. And I think this number is higher than both of Paul's seasons. So yeah, you can definitely tell that they chose a favorite when it comes to the edit and the narration and just gave them all the content within the last few seasons. Casey got to 138 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 166.7, causing 166.17. This causes for her to have a misallocation amount of negative 28.17, and she essentially suffered from the same thing Angela did, with being invisible for the first half of the season, and while being more prominent in the second half, she was still pretty overshadowed. So these are the numbers pertaining the total misallocation and the percentages of confessionals missed. So let's just move right along. Big Brother 21 has 1,558 overall diary rooms, and the episode sum is 421. So dividing 1558 by 421, you get a rate by episode sum of 3.7. And rounding that up, that causes for it to be rounded up to 4 confessionals. So David got 19 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 29.6, causing for a negative 10.6 misallocation by episode amount. So he really just barely made it into the red zone and barely escaped the yellow. Ovi got 38 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 40.7, causing for a negative 2.7 misallocation. So he's still in that perfect range and median, and he's very close to having the perfect distribution. Kemi got 31 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 40.7, causing for a misallocation amount of negative 9.7, so she barely stayed in yellow. Isabella got 42 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 51.8, causing her to have a negative 9.8 misallocation by episode amount, and she also barely stayed in the yellow range. Sam got 63 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 62.91, causing for him to have a misallocation amount of 0.08. So he's essentially the one who has the closest to being perfectly misallocated, in my opinion, or at least so far, but that might be wrong. Jack got 85 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 74.01. This causes him to have a 10.98 misallocation by episode, so he barely made it into the green, where he is a bit overly distributed, in my opinion, based off of these numbers. Catherine got 75 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 85.11. This causes her to have a negative 10.11 misallocation amount, so she just left the yellow and barely made it in the red, so she's a bit under distributed. Annalise got 41 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 96.21. This causes her to have a misallocation of negative 55.21. This means that she's missing more than half of the amount of diary rooms that she needs in order to have a perfect distribution. Nick got 95 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 107.32, causing for a negative 12.32 misallocation. So he just missed out on being in the perfectly distributed median range. Jessica got 79 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 118.42. This causes her to have a negative 39.42 misallocation amount, and this really isn't a surprise since she was kind of always just on the outs in the dynamics, and she wasn't the most dynamic. Christy got 173 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 118.42. This causes her to have a misallocation by episode amount of 54.57. And this really isn't surprising, to be honest, since she was one of the main narrators of the season, and she got into a lot of drama, and she was probably one of the better strategists from her side of the house. Tommy got 123 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 129.52, causing for him to have a negative 6.52 misallocation amount, so he's still in the evenly distributed bracket. Cliff got 167 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 140.62, causing for a 26.37 misallocation amount. Nicole got 160 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 148.02, causing for a misallocation amount of 11.97. Holly got 115 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 148.02, causing for a negative 33.02 misallocation by episode amount, and that's pretty large for someone who is a finalist, especially when the endgamers all got more distribution or an even amount of distribution. Jackson got 252 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 148.02. This causes him to have a 3.97 misallocation amount. And based off the amount of people over the last few seasons that had roughly this amount of misallocation, they usually got runner-up. So the fact that he won clearly showed that production kind of got what they wanted with this one. So this is the number of the season total misallocation, which I did by adding all the misallocations that each house gets had, and then dividing it by the episode sum, which calls for the percentage of confessionals misallocated to be shown on the screen here. And that's the result. On to the final season in this era is Big Brother 22, which has an overall confessional amount of 1,575 and an episode sum of 370. So with the former being divided by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 4.25 confessionals, which is rounded down to 4 confessionals per house guest per episode in order to have a balanced and evenly distributed confessional diary room count and edit. Keisha got 11 diary rooms throughout the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 17.02. This causes her to have a negative 6.02 misallocation amount, so she's still in the evenly distributed range. Nicole A got 21 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 29.79, causing her to have a negative 8.79 misallocation, causing her to barely be in the evenly distributed range, so leaning negative. Janelle got 47 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 42.56, causing for a misallocation amount of 4.43. Kaser got 56 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 55.33, causing for a misallocation amount of 0.66, so he has one of the most balanced misallocations or allocations out of everyone on the shows thus far, or one of them. Bailey has 42 diary rooms in the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 68.1, and she is the first one who's severely under-edited and under-distributed, as she has a negative 26.1 misallocation amount. And this kind of makes sense since she didn't get much of an edit, and she really wasn't that relevant to the ongoings of the house, at all. Ian got 42 diary rooms throughout the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 80.87, causing him to have a negative 38.87 misallocation amount. And this isn't shocking since he missed out on roughly half of the diary rooms that he should have gotten, but he really wasn't relevant to anything that was happening in the season, and he wasn't dynamic whatsoever. Devon got 102 diary rooms throughout the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 93.64, causing her to have a misallocation amount of 8.35, and this is the first season where she has a relatively balanced distribution amount, meaning she isn't overly distributed. Kevin got 95 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 106.41, causing for a negative 11.41 misallocation, so he barely made it into the under-distributed point of view, or mark. David got 84 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 106.41, causing for a negative 22.41 misallocation amount. Danielle got 99 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 106.41, causing her to have a negative 7.41 misallocation amount. And I think this is the first season where she also was perfectly distributed, or at least in that range, compared to being overly distributed. So Tyler got 128 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 119.18, causing for an 8.81 misallocation by episode amount. So he was close to being over distributed, but he's still in the evenly distributed range, which is definitely a huge contrast compared to how he was on his prior season. Memphis got 98 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 131.95, causing for a negative 33.95 misallocation amount. And I am honestly shocked by this because he won quite a few HOHs throughout the season, but he really just didn't get much screen time when it comes to this, which I found pretty interesting. Christmas got 150 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 144.72, causing for a 5.27 misallocation amount. Nicole F got 186 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 157.5, causing for a misallocation amount of 28.5. And I believe in all three of her seasons, she always got more distribution when it comes to her diary room count, or it's bloated. Enzo got 186 diary rooms, like Nicole, and his expected count by episode amount, like Nicole, is 157.5. And like Nicole, he has a misallocation amount of 28.5. I've never seen something where two finalists have the exact same amount of diary rooms and all that stuff, so I found that to be pretty neat. Cody got 228 diary rooms throughout the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 157.5, causing for a 70.5 misallocation amount. And this really isn't shocking, since they tend to do this with a lot of their winners, especially during this era or the people that they project to win. The season total misallocation amount is here, and the percentage is very clear, and it's all very, very, very small. So that is it for this era. Big Brother 23 has an overall confessional count of 1,558, and the episode sum, so that's me adding up all the episodes that each contestant was in, adds up to 379. This causes me to divide the former by the latter to have a rate by episode sum, and that causes the rate by episode sum for each contestant in each episode to have 4 confessionals if things were evenly distributed no matter what. And now we're going to see how it adds up. Travis got 11 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 16.44. This causes for a misallocation by episode amount of negative 5.44. So he is still in that roughly evenly edited range between 10 and negative 10, so relatively balanced enough. Frenchie has 64 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 28.77, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of 35.22. And we all know that this happened because he was HOH the first week and was on the block and evicted the following week. Brett got 43 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 41.10, causing for a 1.89 misallocation by episode amount. So literally his balance is almost perfect. Whitney has 37 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 53.44, causing her to have a negative 16.44 distribution. So she's the first person so far that is in the red, though not too much in the red. Christian got 56 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 65.77, and he just missed escaping being in the red, as he's in the perfect median with negative 9.77 misallocation amount. Brittany got 69 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 78.1, causing for a misallocation amount of negative 9.10. So she almost made it to the red, but just managed to stay in the perfectly edited range. Barely. Derek got 108 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 90.43, causing for a 17.56 misallocation. So he definitely got more than he needed to, but it really isn't that big of a deal. We're going to the opposite end of the spectrum with the next few, as Sarah Beth has 85 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 102.77, leading for a 17.77 misallocation amount. Claire continues the trend as she has 92 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 115.1, causing for a negative 23.1 misallocation amount, and this is the hugest so far in the season. Elsa is roughly around the same, as she got 94 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 115.1, since her and Clara put it in the same episode. And her misallocation by episode amount is a bit smaller, but it's still relatively large, as it's negative 21.1. Tiffany has 148 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 127.43, causing for a 20.56 misallocation amount. And I believe that is the biggest one in a positive direction regarding her being over distributed. Now we're moving on to Hannah, who has 88 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 127.43. This causes her to have a misallocation amount of negative 39.43, meaning that she's missing yeah, she is missing about, let's see, a third of the diary rooms that she would need to have a balanced edit, and this is one of the largest misallocation numbers that I've seen just in general, which isn't good. Kylan has 157 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 139.76, causing for a 17.23 misallocation amount, so he's a bit overly distributed. Gaza has 146 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 152.1, causing for a negative 6 misallocation amount, so she's still in the perfect median average. Derek F has 172 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 152.1, causing for a 19.89 misallocation amount, so overly distributed. Xavier has 188 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 152.1, causing for a 35.89 misallocation amount, and this is definitely the largest out of anyone on the cast. So that is what I got with the numbers below, but honestly, I don't even know if it's really like the most accurate or the numbers was just too small and gave me that. So honestly, you could just ignore that part. So with Big Brother 24, it does have 1,219 confessionals with an episode sum of 363. With me dividing the former by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 3.35, which averages 3 confessionals per episode, which every contestant should have if things were evenly distributed. Paloma has an average of 19 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 13.43, causing her to have a misallocation amount of 5.56, so she is in the perfectly distributed median. With Pooch, he has 21 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 23.5, causing him to have a negative 2.5 misallocation amount, so he's in the perfect median and is very close to having a perfect distribution. Amira has 46 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 33.58, causing for a 12.41 misallocation amount, so she just barely makes it to the already distributed misallocation, but not by much. Nicole has 41 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 43.65, causing her to have a negative 2.65 misallocation amount, so pretty close to perfect. Daniel has 73 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 53.73, causing for a 19.26 misallocation amount, so he's definitely a bit overtly distributed. So we have our first person in red with Indy, who has 42 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 63.8, causing for a misallocation amount by negative 21.8. This really isn't shocking because she wasn't involved in the gameplay and she didn't really have a big personality. Jasmine has 76 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 73.87, causing for a misallocation amount of 2.12. Joseph got 71 diary rooms, and he has an expected count by episode amount of 73.87, causing for a negative 2.87 misallocation. It's ironic that he and Jasmine are pretty close to being perfectly allocated. Kyle has 122 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 83.95, causing him to have a 38.04 misallocation amount, and that's definitely one of the larger ones. of the season. Terrence has 99 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 94.02, causing for a 4.97 misallocation amount, so he's still in that perfect median range. Now we are moving on to the end gamers, and there are a lot of greens. Michael has 177 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 94.02, causing for an 82.97 misallocation by episode. That's definitely one of the largest ones that I have seen in a while. Alyssa has 111 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 104.1, costing for a 6.89 misallocation amount, which is perfectly balanced. Brittany has 131 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 110.81, costing for a misallocation of 20.18. Turner has 201 diary rooms, causing an expected count by episode amount is 117.53. His misallocation amount is 83.46, which is definitely huge. Monty has 190 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 117.53, costing for a misallocation amount of 72.46. Taylor has 230 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 117.53. Her misallocation by episode amount is 112.46. This really isn't shocking due to the amount that the season centered around her and due to them trying to push some like badass personality on her as well. But seeing the raw numbers is just a sight to behold. So these are the final numbers, and if accurate, I will have to say that this is one of the most misallocated seasons. But when you look at the numbers of the endgamers, it really isn't shocking overall. We are moving on to Big Brother 25, which has an overall diary room count of 1999 or 1999, however you prefer it said. And the episode sum, which is adding all the episodes that each contestants were in, add up to 451. With dividing the former and the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 4.43 confessionals, which is rounded down to the average that every person should get per episode is 4 confessionals if things were evenly distributed. He has an overall diary room count of 1, which, wow, and he has an expected count by episode amount of 17.72, causing for a misallocation amount of negative 16.72. Kirsten has 19 diary rooms, causing her to have an expected count by episode amount of 17.72, which adds up to a 1.27 misallocation amount, so she in general has a pretty close to perfect allocation amount. Riley has 49 die rooms, and her expected count is 31.02 die rooms, causing her to have a 17.97 over misallocation. So just from this, she has about 20 more than she should have. Hissam has 59 die rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 44.32, costing for a 14.67 misallocation, so he is definitely over distributed. And just like Raleigh, it kind of makes sense because there are both early HOHs and then Symptom right afterwards. Red has 44 diary rooms overall, and his expected count by episode amount is 70.91. This causes for him to have a negative 26.91 diary room count, and I believe this is close to 40% that he is missing, which yikes. Izzy has 52 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 84.21, causing her to have a negative misallocation of negative 32.21. And for her, it's probably around 40% as well regarding the amount that she's missing, which is very bad. Jared has 126 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 106.37, causing for him to have a 19.62 misallocation amount, so he is in the green.
Miko has 44 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 119.67. This causes her to have a huge misallocation amount of negative 75.67. So, just from my immediate math, this is like a 60% percentages that she is missing regarding her misallocation, and that is huge. Honestly, I think this might be the largest number of a negative misallocation that I have ever seen. Anyways, Cameron has 202 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 132.97, causing him to have a 69.02 over misallocation, meaning that he essentially got a third amount of diary rooms more than he should have, technically. Corey has 155 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 146.26, causing for a misallocation amount of 8.73. So he's still in that perfect median, though barely. Blue has 123 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 159.56, causing for a misallocation amount of negative 36.56, which really isn't the most shocking now that I'm really thinking about it. So, on to our end gamers. America has 126 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 159.56, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of negative 33.56. And just from this number, she is missing about a fifth of her diary rooms, but this is still a pretty low. Sorry, this isn't a good misallocation amount at all. So I guess it could be worse, maybe, I don't know, but it's still pretty low, especially compared to all the other endgamers. Suri has 239 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 172.86, causing her to have a huge misallocation amount of 66.13. This really isn't shocking since she was the surprise Z. She is a reality TV veteran, and she also had her son in the house while masterminding a lot of the season, so this was kind of just expected. Felicia has 212 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 177.29, causing for a 34.7 misallocation amount. It's not one of the larger misallocations, though it still is pretty big, and she's such a unique personality who's nominated a lot, so this kind of makes sense. Whatever I said about America having a large misallocation by the endgamers, kind of just erase that because Bowie Jane has 113 diary rooms, which is like half the amount that Felicia has, and her expected catch by episode amount is 186.15. This means that she has a negative 73.15 misallocation amount. And honestly, this might be larger than Miko's misallocation, which is horrendous. And she's in the final three. Yikes. Matt has 167 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 186.15. This causes him to have a negative 19.15 misallocation amount, which definitely is not good. And it's very rare to have two people in the final three to be in the red on this. Jag has 268 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 186.15, causing for him to have an over misallocation amount of 81.84. So these are the numbers of everything added together, and I'm not really too sure about it. And honestly, you can kind of just ignore it, but here it is. Now we are moving on to our final season in Big Brother 26, which literally just happened as I'm recording this. So the overall confessional count for this season is 1,889, and the episode sum is 406. So dividing the former by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 1.65 confessionals per episode. And writing that up, that would mean 5, essentially. Matt has 27 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 18.61, causing Cam to have a misallocation amount of 8.38, so he's on the higher end of the perfectly distributed median. Lisa has 26 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 32.56, causing her to have a negative 6.56 misallocation, so still in that range but closer to the lower end. Kenny has 45 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 46.52, causing for him to have a negative 1.52 misallocation amount, so literally close to perfect. Cedric has 80 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 65.13, causing him to have a 14.86 misallocation, so he just made it to the green mark, which isn't shocking since he was HOH and on the block for half of the weeks he was in the house. Brooklyn is the first person in red from the season, as she has 55 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 79.09, causing her to have a negative 24.09 misallocation amount, and this really isn't shocking. Tucker has 150 diary rooms, causing him, sorry, he also has an expected count by episode amount of 97.7. This causes him to have a misallocation amount of 52.29. So this essentially means that he got a third more diary rooms than he should have, or 1.5 times the amount of diary rooms that he should have. And this really isn't shocking just based off the mess he created in the season. And things will get more imbalanced as we go through these next several people. On the other end of the spectrum is Joseph, who has 51 diary rooms, while he literally has 101 less than Tucker, despite lasting a week longer. And his expected count by episode amount is 111.66, causing him to have a negative 60.66 misallocation amount. One, this is one of the larger misallocation amounts in the negative, and two, this means he is missing over half the amount of diagrams that he should have for a more distributed edit and balance. We're going back in the opposite direction with Quinn, who has 175 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 120.97, causing for him to have a 54.02 misallocation amount. So we're going back the opposite way again with Tikor, who has 87 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 134.92, causing for a negative 47.92 misallocation amount. We're still in the red, but it isn't nearly as dramatic, with Leah, who has 130 diary rooms. Her expected count per episode amount is 148.88, causing for a negative 18.88 misallocation amount. Angela has 199 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 153.53. This causes her to have a misallocation amount of 45.46, which really isn't shocking. Chemo has 138 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 162.84, causing for him to have a negative 24.84 misallocation amount. Honestly, I'm shocked it's not larger. Rubina has 117 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 172.15, and she has a negative 55.15 misallocation amount, which really isn't shocking to me at all, and it means that she's missing more than a third of the diary rooms that she should have if things were evenly distributed. Cameron has 134 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 181.45. He is missing negative 47.45 diary rooms based off of his misallocation amount, and this really isn't surprising either. Mackenzie has 214 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 181.45, causing her to have a 32.54 misallocation in the positive direction. Chelsea has 261 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 181.45, causing her to have a 79.54 misallocation amount, which really isn't shocking for a winner, so yeah. These are the final numbers below. There's really not much to say here, and I don't even know if it's fully accurate. but I just wanted to put it here because I put it here for every other season. Alrighty, so this was something that I've been working on for like the past 5 or 6 months. It was kind of fun gathering all the information, trying to understand all the information, and then organizing it and seeing how the diary room distribution stayed the same or changed throughout the eras, years, and decades. So, thank you all for watching this. I'm going to use some of this video or some of the information here for our other videos. So, I'm definitely going to at some point make a list regarding the people who has the most negative misallocations, and I'll do the inverse for such that has the most positive misallocations. Or I'll do something like the most underdistributed jurors, endgamers, pre-jurors, or the most distributed pre-jurors, jurors, endgamers, stuff like that. So thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more stuff soon. Bye!